Timber frame. We are given rivers so we know our hearts can break, but still keep us breathing. And our bodies, just barns collapsing near a creek and an open meadow we drive by on a lone 2-lane highway. Buried in the cool creek, which reaches out to the mighty Methow River and then Columbia to find the Pacific. Still, the salmon return to bury their young in reed beds. We know this. We see their fins find their home, but it is still our hearts who need the rafters of our mind to hear a lone barn sparrow nesting to believe it's just spring. To feel winter is nothing but a sleep. Their nest, mud cup formed with left yarn, found twig is their house. Friends to farmers with their watery song, as I am just a girl from Michigan who knows the cold water of the dead river, which only means still in French, not death. A river is never a full end. I see both sides of the deep north woods, white pine chopped for masts, ships to carry men out of the Great Lakes to salted waters wide in the cold Atlantic. But here in the middle, under pine sweet summer sun, I collect red tart sweet, cooling my feet in the river and the eddy of thimbleberry fingers. I eat all I can find. And I look to the west, over sandy Superior shores, and feel some cardinal pull of hope in waters that lie beyond. I land along the rocky Oregon coast, spend a full summer pulling willows to sever their shoots, throw them into mud, pooled by meadows, cornflower blue. I'm ignorant happy they'll grow like mistletoe. I don't know these lands of someone else's childhood, but I know no matter where we home, we harvest what feeds us and what will grow back. The winds take what cannot stay, like love in a timber frame cabin, an open window always left unlocked.
Nice. All right. Well, welcome to another edition of Poets in Montana, and our guest today, and that beautiful poem you just heard was by Emily Walter.
Hi, Mark.
How are you?
I'm so good. I'm so good. I'm so glad to be by you.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here. and that was a terrific poem, which sort of opened us up to kind of, a bit about where you came from and where you are and what you're up to. So anywhere you want to start with that? I mean, in terms of, I know you came here from Michigan. I remember first meeting you because of the Good Food Store.
Right.
Because you worked with my wife.
Right.
And then it was like, oh, and Emily's a poet. I was like, oh, really? And then I started reading your stuff, and it was like, wow. So where did you go to school?
So my undergraduate started at University of Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
But I like to always tell people that poetry studies started at the very beginning.
Yeah, there you go.
And for me, I spent so much time outside in what's known as Leelanau Peninsula, which if you know anyone from Michigan, they'll do this where they'll say, they'll take their left hand. And so I'm from I call it the entire pinky.
Yeah.
And Leelanau means land of delight in Ojibwa.
Mm-hmm.
And I love it there. It's beautiful and it's home.
Yeah.
But because it's so beautiful and it was at that point really wild and mostly cherry trees, big forests, and my father, who's an architect, but he loves poetry,
Mm-hmm.
and I think of him as a poet.
Did he introduce you to poetry?
He did.
Yeah.
So he and I would spend a lot of time together. We'd be out in the woods chopping, collecting firewood, blah, blah, and he would say, oh, this reminds me of a Robert Frost poem. And he has so many Robert Frost poems memorized.
Right.
But I don't think he's ever written a poem himself. He's an architect, but he, when he was in undergrad at University of Michigan, also loved and memorized Robert Frost poems.
Right.
Because for where we were living and what was happening felt like a Robert Frost poem.
Yeah, and he's definitely a northern tier.
Yeah,
poet,
yeah. I mean, I think he's definitely
rural.
45th parallel. I mean, Vermont. But I mean, he did teach at University of Michigan, not when I was there.
Oh, yeah.
But
I didn't even know that.
yeah. I mean, I think a lot of poets sort of circled through Ann Arbor.
Mm-hmm.
It's just such a great town and literary place.
Yeah.
But I mean, I didn't really want to go to University of Michigan. I wanted to go west.
Mm-hmm. So the West had always been kind of
Yes.
a romantic notion in your
Yes.
head?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, there isn't a better romantic notion than the West for Americans.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Americans that of a certain age that grew up on Westerns. And
Right. Or just like this. I mean, it's kind of
unless
this-
you're Native American.
Right. And so, I mean, it was just this draw. And I think, my undergraduate was there, and then I went and taught abroad for 10 years and studied languages. And
Where'd you teach?
I taught in Poland first for 3 years.
Huh.
And the desire there was poetry.
Right.
I had taken this class by Silas Moss that literally blew my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And in that class, the last semester of this, graduating, I have Silas Moss, and she had this book of contemporary Eastern European poets.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, this is what I want to do.
Huh.
I want to learn Polish and be a translator.
Right.
The poetry just was clean, it was clear, it was direct, it was
Milosh-esque.
yeah, and it was all, and I thought, this is the poetry that speaks to me. I at that time when I was 21, 22, I think I wanted to go east, and going east, and especially right now with what's happening in Ukraine, it's hard not to,
Right.
for me, when I listen and watch, just absolutely fall in love once again with Poland.
Right.
As a place of peace and as a geographic, unfortunate doormat in a way.
Yeah. I've been trampled upon so many times.
Right, but more Nobel Prize winning poets have come out of Poland.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just drawn, and I was determined to learn Polish, and I thought that's what I would do and go to grad school. And
Cool. Well, did you go to grad school back there?
I didn't. So I went to Poland, and then I got into teaching and loved it, and then I lived in France and taught there, and then I actually lived in Italy and in Rome.
Wow.
And taught there at
Cool.
the American Overseas School. I loved it, and I kind of realized that I actually think I'm not an academic. I'm a teacher, and I loved it, and I kind of realized that I really wanted to keep teaching,
Right.
but I still had this desire to write poems.
Right.
And I didn't really write that many poems as an undergrad. I was too shy and too intimidated by Ann Arbor. I kind of felt like at that point I just wanted to read.
Right.
So I did apply to a bunch of schools and specifically wanted to go and work with Charles Simic
Wow.
at that time, this is in 2000s, and at that time he was known, but it wasn't like people were flocking to work with him, and I didn't get in, and I was like
Crushed.
crushed.
Yeah.
But I applied to NMU, which is Northern Michigan University, just on a whim. And they sent, literally I sent in the application a week later. They're like, will you be a writing fellow? And I was like, sure.
Cool.
So it was great.
Yeah.
It was really smart from an economic standpoint, but also it was a cool homecoming, like to be able to come back to Michigan, but be in a remote place, focus on poetry. And after almost 10 years of being away, it was a really beautiful homecoming, but not home,
Right.
not Leelanau, but Northern Michigan.
Right.
Yeah, and I loved it. I worked with Austin Hummel, and I got to teach, which really feeds me. And
Right.
because I thought, what am I going to do if I'm a poet? Like, how am I going to support myself?
Good question. Work at the good food store.
Right.
So, do you have anything Michigan related that you wanna read?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so hard because so much. I think too. So much of my geography is Michigan based.
Right.
I mean, it's always there.
Right. Sure.
I would love to. Can I read from your book that you
sure.
have?
Certainly.
Because
Yes.
the sonnet is about in Michigan.
Right.
If that's okay, I would love to read. Is it in here?
And then this is the other page.
Oh, perfect. Here it is. Great. Okay. Paradoxical Undressing. A girl walking home through blizzard can sometimes hear her blood's rhythm. She counts the beat with her hands spread open and the chord of C. Her fingers scissor each note as she lifts the bodice of dress overhead, her face flushed pink in the heat of the numb sun. She wets her lips shut, unties the knot at her neck, stands naked in a chemise. When she's found with only her bonnet in a bank of snow, her eyes are all smiles. Her last tracks outline a waltz. Her body no longer a pulse counted, but pearled in the field. Not a snow globe shaken with bone and rice. Not something trapped under glass.
Nice.
So, I mean, it's not really Michigan geography, but it's Michigan like mythology in a way of what happens to the body in deep cold. So, I mean, it could be anywhere, hopefully, in the above the 45th parallel.
There you go. And so in terms of that form, I mean, that's a very. I mean, that's a total sonnet form.
It is.
I mean, but you have to listen hard to pick up on that kind of the musical,
Right.
because I mean, you know, that or the success of, like I one of the ones that I had talked to Jennifer Finley, and she was talking about when she studied with Jim Simmerman down in northern Arizona, and one of the things that he told, which is what all great teachers tell anybody that comes into trying to write form or not form, is that form poems shouldn't draw attention to themselves, and non-form poems should have their own form.
Right.
You know, that
Oh,
kind
agreed.
of a thing.
That's so smart.
Yeah, and so this one, I mean, I wouldn't, you know, just hearing it, you wouldn't exactly think of it as a sonnet.
No.
Do you do a lot of form poems still?
I do a lot of sonnets. I love and adore the metrical quality, the mathematics. I mean, you know those silly tests that you take when you're in school and they say you should become this. So those tests were always showing that I had a propensity towards math and mechanical engineering.
Right.
And I think I love sonnet and I love formal poetry, but I don't love it for the reasons of its sort of academic place. I mean, I love poetry going back to how I first was introduced.
Right.
That poetry isn't something of it's more a conversation with a good friend. And so wanting to write a sonnet and wanting to write an idea, to me it's more the efficiency, the mathematical rigor. I think it's fun. I don't expect anyone else to think it's fun. I love it when people are like, oh, that's
Right.
But it's not sort of the point. The point is, does the poem work? Is it allowing someone to visually be part of that experience?
Right.
Is it a new way of understanding a strange old medical term, which is paradoxical undressing?
Right. That's an old medical term.
Well, and it was like people didn't know what was going on. I mean, there's crazy stories of people found in the middle of Sweden, mostly men at the time, right? Without any of their pants on.
Right.
And they're like, what has happened?
Right. What got into his head? Yeah, exactly.
Why are all these guys without pants?
Yeah.
And then, in the United States, it was kind of this interesting, once it was once women were found without their undergarments on,
Right.
you know, there was this sort of unfortunate
Hypothermia began to be understood.
Right, yeah, like finally people were like, oh, this is like in that crazy point of the brain when you're about to die.
Yeah. You're so hot.
You're so hot that so you pull the clothes away from the hottest part of your body.
Right.
Anyway, I just thought it was an amazing idea. And I also got into this idea of like, oh my God, like snow globes used to be made out of shards of bone.
Right.
Ew.
Right.
That seems dark.
And rice.
Rice.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I like toying the line both in, like, I love forms, I love sonnets, I love their efficiency, and I like their history. It's about an argument, it's about something you want to say, or also something you just love. Mostly, that's where my poems will always come from.
Yeah. Well, and you know, I yesterday, not to get off the track because I want you to go back to something here, but yesterday I worked with kids, and because we had this late, not late, I guess, we're in Montana. We're above the 45th
Right,
parallel.
yeah, we are, yeah.
But we had the snow, and we got down to 5 degrees,
Right.
and so I thought, well, you know, one last go at a snow poem of
Why
some
not?
kind.
Right.
So I gave them a bunch of examples, and of course, you know, one of the ones, because it is a form poem, was old Bob Frost.
Right.
The stopping by the woods on
Like,
a
how could
snowy
you-
evening.
right,
I mean,
right.
And it's like one of the most overused poems probably in the
Exactly.
English language. Why do you
Exactly.
think that is?
Oh, because it's true.
And it works.
And it works. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, I think Hugo said it the best, and this is one of my goals, is that, you know, Hugo wrote in Triggering Town, you must risk sentimentality.
Right.
And it's not, I think too often we're afraid of the word sentimental, but really the drive is the verb, is risk.
Right.
What are you willing to risk? And
Well,
so I think right.
And heart is what you're
Heart.
risking.
You're always risking. I
Yeah,
mean, like,
yeah.
I feel like the thing about, I don't know, for Paradoxical Undressing, I was in love with this idea that in that moment of death, or that there was beauty, or that the body itself finds grace,
Right.
supposedly. I mean, it's like, also Paradoxical Undressing is one of these weird, bizarre things that very few people can come back and say, oh, hey, by the way.
You get really hot.
You get really hot,
Yeah,
and then someone saves you, and you're fine. I mean, obviously, they've learned more about it, but.
Right.
So it's writing that risk. And also, I love to write poems that people understand. I'm not a performer. I wish I was, but I love to write thinking that people are sitting someplace reading and feeling a closeness.
Right.
Their own paradoxical undressing.
Yeah, I mean, that's poetry does have those two. You know, I mean, everything does, I guess, but poetry, I think, a lot of times we expect it. I do. I mean, I've been involved in this whole poetry out loud thing that students do across the state and the country for a long time.
It's
Because I think of poetry as an oral art form, but it
Sure.
also is very much an art form on the page or in a book. And as I was looking at, I don't know if it was in here or one of the ones that you had sent me, but you know, I was just, besides the sonnet form, you know, I was struck by the internal rhymes and the enjambment kind of breaks at the end where you get the surprise. What I like about poetry is the same thing I like about comedy.
Right.
It's the surprise.
It's the
right?
same thing, because
And-
at the core is empathy.
And
at the core.
fuck anybody.
Yes. No.
who
fuck
wants
that
to say
shit. No.
who wants to say
No.
you can't do that. Oh,
No,
you can't.
no, fuck
you. Know,
you.
because
No.
comedy and poetry off limits.
No,
you
and
should
it's
be
so
able
true.
to be as ugly as life can be there, and then that's a representation of what that is.
And that's when it gets good.
No, I don't know if it's good necessarily,
Well, I
but
mean,
it's
like,
real.
It's real. It's
Yeah.
real. And like, you're right. And thank you for differentiating, because, I mean, I feel like something, I'd like to move away from the word good or bad. It's good. That's important. I think when a poem works is when it's real. And I completely agree. And I admire, I mean, to me, one of my favorite people is Dave Chappelle. And I love Louis C.K. And I love all these people that people are like, oh my God, they can't say this.
Right.
They said that. And I'm
Right.
like, they said what's true.
Right.
Or
right.
true to them, or true to them. And
you know, and then of course there's always the other angle too. In a world where we know everything about anybody who's a public figure,
I know.
you can find out about behaviors that people should maybe be in jail for, possibly in their private life, but
Right.
that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with what their art is or what that
Right.
art form was. And it's like, I refuse to never watch another Woody Allen movie that I've watched in the past, simply because we know different things maybe about that person.
well, totally,
in
and that's a
life
great
now,
example.
you know.
It's a great
Yeah.
example of because I do think when we're writing poems, we want to risk. We want to always risk the surprise. I mean, to carry on that idea of like a punchline and a joke. But like one of the things that you'll watch and listen for in Dave Chappelle's delivery is the cycle back, right? The repetition,
Oh, yeah.
the turn.
He's a craftsman.
He's a
master
right,
at what he does.
Right,
Yeah,
and he
yeah.
also will be the first to say that it's the art form that he appreciates. The
Yeah.
art form. And I feel the same way in the art form. There's so many different kinds of poetry that I don't write myself,
Right.
that I deeply appreciate, that I
Exactly.
feel works and risks a lot. It might not be what I want to contribute, but
Right.
it has such value and
It's not
joy.
it's not the first album you're going to throw on
No.
the platter, but you want it on the shelf
Yeah.
because you're going to go to it at some
Right,
time.
yeah.
Read me that poem.
Okay.
We're going to Montana.
Oh, okay.
Moving to
Moving
Montana
Montana.
soon.
Okay, Montana. You drove me out of the dog dish of Missoula and into the country where we got lost in the threading of our voices with the windows open. Everything was open then. We talked about the wingman in Brazil, your cat Lulu, my dog in Michigan, and ignored the Bitterroot River. The dirt roads kept us from lunch. We sat on a rock wanting to undress each other down to the skin we would later learn to sink into. And when we stood on top of the butte, I stared at your hair, dark like a stone too heavy to move. As a child, I collected agates, smooth and black, tadpoles in a desert pool. I thought I could take the darkness out of water. Today, I sweep up hair from my dying black lab, and I cannot stop thinking of you. I cannot stop the cancer chasing her while she dreams of squirrels. Dogs are smart, or not. Either way, they don't look back. So a funny thing about that poem, I first wrote it about a boyfriend in Italy.
Mm-hmm.
And this is in Marquette when I wrote that.
Okay.
And my thesis advisor, Austin Hummel, was like, you can't write about Italy, Emily. I was like, why? He's like, because it's not romantic. And I go, oh, okay.
Unless you're Italian.
Right. I was like,
Or live
okay.
there
He's
for-
like, you don't want to be that girl. You don't want to be the girl who's this white girl who writes about Italy and their time there.
It'll
And
be
I was,
appropriation.
right. But I was like, okay. And he's like, okay, let's think of a place that we can, let's think of a place. And I was like, he's like, I was like, and the dog who's dying, her name was Montana.
Oh, there you go.
And I was like, well, the dog's name's Montana. He's like, perfect. Okay, it's going to be set in Missoula. And I was like, I don't know. I've like never been to Missoula, right?
Right.
And he was like, Missoula. It's this is perfect, Emily. It's the dog dish of Montana. And I was like, the dog dish. It's like, so I totally craft that poem because the dog that I was loving more than the boyfriend.
Yeah.
And having those, which is true. Sometimes you realize when a relationship's dying or it's not going well, and you have this pet that you and your person share,
Right.
and you are absolutely in love with the pet.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I think that's a funny story because now here I am. I live in Missoula, and
Was the pet really dying?
she really did, and she
Yeah.
died. Montana died. She was a wonderful black lab.
Yeah.
And the guy was great. He's great, but he's, back in Michigan.
And there's the risk of sentimentality.
Totally.
Writing a dog poem.
Right, and it was funny because Austin Hummel was like, there's only one thing you can't do in my with me as a writer. And I was like, oh, okay. And he's like, you can write about masturbation, you can write about incest, you can write about like the most graphic things, but there's one thing you can't do. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. I was like, I'm already like, I'm not going to write about any. And he goes, you can't write about a dying pet. And like, of course, I'm the person that's like, watch me.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly.
So it was kind of a joke that we had between us that was actually happening. And when I was in grad school, had this relationship and the dog was dying.
I remember being in a graduate creative writing workshop and being told that nobody, writes about. You can't write about the moon.
Oh, right.
You can't write about
geography.
Wolves. There's certain things you just can't say. You can't even use that word. It's just too loaded or whatever. And it's like
geography was one.
Yeah,
that was told you could never use the word geography and bones. And I was like, okay.
Why? Yeah, it's like,
isn't there a book called Geography of Nowhere?
Whatever. I'd just rather be stupid and just write
I know,
and make mistakes.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally.
Let me make mistakes.
This is interesting. I mean, when you were going to do this, I thought about this because this was the place where I first sort of saw your poems, more than one poem that you sent me, to put together this a journal, I guess you'd call it. It's more like an anthology because there's so many. There's so many poems in here, but what I would like you to do now for me is read the first poem.
Ooh.
And
Yes.
here, and then there's this other version that you have worked over and kind of go through that, and then that might lead you into more.
I would
of
love
the current
to.
stuff you're working on.
Oh, yeah,
You're
I would
working
love
on a
to.
book right now, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
I'm
so we want to
working-
get to that.
Yeah. And yes, so I would be honored. And I think I appreciate that you want me to do this because there's this idea that I'm just saying the same thing. But hopefully over time and experience, I'm growing up.
No,
or
no,
maturing.
no.
Or evolving. Let's say evolving.
Yeah, whatever. Say
Yeah.
whatever you want to say. Just read the goddamn
Let's read
poems.
Okay, I'll shut up.
All right.
I'll just read the poem. City Horses. So this was written in 2008.
Okay.
City Horses. Behind fences in the noon sun, they look tired from all the work they haven't done. Left alone too long by boys who only fall in love with women 16 feet tall. Screen lips that flicker red. Even in Montana, horses look silly in cities, slowing traffic down to parade some past, a powwow bridled on a college campus. Upriver, children learn to hide without long shadows of barns, spend night with sky of parking lots instead of orchards to feed Appaloosas. The West, harnessed by a lone billboard, preaches the burnt word from a church's shotgun, held in the hands of someone else's 12-year-old son. But the horses, too, just need to be alone to just run.
Cool. Do you want to do the other one?
Sure.
I'll get rid of that for you.
Oh, no, it's okay. A treaty for the grasses. In the windswept hills of Three Forks lies a dale with ironclad horses. Statues on the leeward side. Some stand bold, some bent to will grasses, and all exposed to prairie winds. Farther west, a large pasture of 5 horses stand in a lazy line by the road. Inviting winter or worn-out sun, horses look tired and less moving. Even in Montana, horses saddled look silly in cities, raining the view of some curated white past. When will we begin to say we're sorry? When will we begin to know it cannot be said in English? Maybe it isn't even said in words. Maybe it begins with a single blade of grass. Sorry. Maybe then we can begin to look into the bold, wide eye of a bison and say, forgive me. Until then, there is this field of horses, either clad in iron or blood. May we give them their own fields, to be free and alone, alone to just run.
Nice. Nicely read, too.
Oh, thanks, Mark.
Yeah.
I've been working on this poem, and it's not. There were moments when I was reading it, I was like, ugh, it's not right. Do you ever have that, Mark?
No. Yeah, all the time. Particularly after they're done, published in a book, and I go back and read them
really?
and go, oh God. Well, and then the next week you go back and read it again, you think, Jesus, that's a great poem.
I know.
You know, so,
Why is that?
Because you're always doubting yourself.
I know.
And you're also in love with yourself. So it depends on who
So
shows
how
up,
do you?
right?
So it's both sides, right? It's both sides.
Yeah,
How do you
exactly.
balance both sides?
I don't know. You wake up with whoever you wake up with, and you
Oh,
go
that's
forward.
good. That's
Reassure
good.
yourself
But
that
you're like, I'm doing great. Shut up. You're doing great.
the sun might rise again tomorrow.
Well, the reason I've been working on that poem is because I wonder about being a white girl from Michigan writing about native lands.
Oh, yeah.
Growing up in Leelanau, so Chippewa, one of the things about this tiny little peninsula where our house was,
Right.
we had northern lights.
Yeah.
And then across the peninsula, there was a casino built on Chippewa, Ojibwa land. And when the casino was built, the lights would just illuminate, and gone were the northern lights. And as a little kid, I was like 5 or 6, I thought, I was so mad, I was,
Wait, is that when it was built?
yeah. And, it's a very remote area at the time. It's very different now, but at that time, this is 1980.
Right.
And it was this strange mix. I thought I wanted to be respectful, understanding, and then all of a sudden I thought, why is this casino? And then it just becomes a really complicated idea, right?
Yeah.
How do we talk as a white person about lands that we might love and feel a connection to as a spiritual being, but also recognizing that we weren't here first.
Well, yeah, no, but by just doing that, I think, for crying out loud, I'm in a lot worse shape than you are.
Why?
Because I'm a white man.
Oh,
you're at least a woman. Look all that's happened in my lifetime.
I know.
It's like you come to realize that, oh shit, you are so blind and so privileged and so, because, and then of course, all of these other individuals who are coming out and saying, what about me? That all of a sudden is, it has changed how we behave. So
Right.
hopefully I'm better than I used to be,
Well,
because I was just blind to everything
No,
for
I
the
was
most
too.
part. Not
And-
totally, but
And so one of the things that evolved, or hopefully evolved, between writing that in 2008 and then writing and evolving this now in 2022, happens to be just from fantastic other poets that I've read, like Layli Long Soldier. That book, her poetry has had such an impact on me.
Cool.
Her book specifically, and then the poem 38, is that so much of that poem is from that poem 38 that she wrote, created, and it took her years to write. And, there's just a respect and a deep value in Joy Harjo as a voice. And, there's so many different poets of Native that I feel a respect for, that I want to continue that web that I have with other poets, and yet I also have a respect and wonder, so there's part of me that looks to the animals, right? The grass, the animal, the bison, and even bison is a charged, hard metaphor.
Oh yeah.
Because you don't want to say buffalo.
I would, but
Right,
then I don't know any better.
But I didn't. So I was working on this poem, and I gave it to someone, and they said, "You can't. Don't use buffalo. That's even that word." And I thought, fuck. Like, I just think, like...
Well, I mean, you know, and I could, you know, and you're old, you're older, you've been, you know, saddled with all the baggage of language that you inherited from your parents, and you've repeated it so many times, you know. I mean, Oriental pops out of my mouth.
Totally,
I don't know how many times, just simply because I was wired that way. But I correct myself now. I mean, that's all we can do, is try to account for what we know now and how we are. But it's still, you know, you can't stop being yourself.
No.
And you can't, you have to be true to whatever you're going to do as a poet. And, you know, so I mean, I think that's all we can do.
And evolve. I mean, I think that, to me, one of the, you know, in what you're saying about, that's one of the biggest challenges when you look at someone's artwork and you appreciate their artwork, but then when you realize and appreciate them as a person, for me, I love their artwork even more.
True.
I think that there's this...
unless they aren't particularly great as a person.
But it was really hard. So my thesis advisor always said to me, he was like, Emily, you don't want to be more dynamic than your poems. And I was like, I don't think that aren't we all? I mean, I don't think there's a divide. I feel like
I don't know what that would be. That's a personal or a persona, I guess.
Right. I don't want to have a persona. I just want to be me.
Yeah. There you go.
I mean,
read us a poem.
Okay, I'm going to read you a poem. This is a sonnet. American Feminism Told Through a Songbird. I hear her first, pause, look up and scan the limbs to find the cedar waxwings singing. Orchard pretty calls. I wait for the repetition, her rhythm more scent than sound. Cherry blossom, sun-clean pillowcases pinned to a clothesline in our backyard. My mother dressed in sunlight, following her song in bare spring, waiting for the impossible fruit to ripen in their throats. This proud song drowns out any cars that pass on gravel, sudden demands gone. I know your song, even faint as a suckled lullaby cooed for my own rest. Your lemon yellow bold subdued crest, rakish black mask, red wax droplets on the wing feathers, all colors of us. You, everyday joy, have a voice to bewitch us, some echo we find inside. I want to sing back. I sing with you and say, the women were coming. We have a lot to say.
Nice. Yeah, good. Yeah, so you are working, this group of poems that you're working on now you're working with someone else?
Yeah, I'm really enjoying it. Yes, I'm working with my good friend Erica Peterman. Mm-hmm. She is a lawyer by profession, and her passion is photography. And so I had asked her last year for her birthday what her favorite bird was. And she told me the cedar waxwing. Okay. And so I wrote her that poem for her birthday.
All right, nice.
Yeah, but it's also going to hopefully be in our book. And the book really is, I think of it as a love letter to Montana. Mm-hmm. You know, in this last election when everything bled red.
Yeah, blood red. Yeah.
I mean, it felt like
everything bled red.
Blood. Yeah. I mean, it felt like a massacre for the Democratic, let alone people of Montana that maybe are Republican but are not Trumpians, right?
Yeah.
Whatever. It just like Gianforte and the gang. It just felt like a sad state. And I don't really know what to do. I'm not necessarily I'm a political person, but I don't. I like to write poems.
Right.
And I don't expect poems to change the world, but we thought, Erica and I came up with this idea. She's really politically involved. I'm passionately involved about politics and birds and nature and the wild spaces that make Montana this amazing place that can't be bought or sold.
Right.
So we're putting together this book, and a lot of them are sonnets. It is something that, you know, in 2020 I did a program for myself. I wrote a sonnet a day to kind of try to make sense of what was going on. And also document the pandemic, and then that kind of spirited this conversation with her, and we were like, why don't we do this?
Okay.
A book of her photos, my poems. It's right now, we're at that stage of putting poems next to photos, things that work.
Right.
And I would imagine maybe you might feel similar in that when you write something, you're just like, oh, it's not done. And I need it. The deadline is the end of this year. So
Right.
deadlines are helpful for me.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but.
Well, you know, I mean, well, deadlines are helpful, yeah. But I mean, at a certain point, you've got to stop with a poem, I think. You just
Yeah.
gotta
I
kinda
feel
walk away.
this poem. I feel good.
Yeah.
I think, you know, I
Right.
mean, that's kind of one of my favorite parts about sonnets.
Right.
As you know.
Well, they've got a frame. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's the Dutch in me. You know,
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
I'm Dutch.
Right.
So maybe it's the old
You've
Dutch
swept
painter.
and cleaned
Yeah, I've
and
swept
got
and
it
cleaned.
all lined out.
Yeah,
and-
but also sort of the Dutch, you know, the Dutch painter of me, a lover of the frame and the visual and the window and the offering, you know, and I'm excited. I'm really excited about it because I don't have a book.
Yeah. Right.
And I thought, you know, I have sent away my manuscript so many times and have had, you know, bulk of the first manuscript published, half of it published, but never quite into a book. And I really want to create something of a love of Montana because I feel like I've grown up in Montana in a way, you know?
You've been here for 20 years?
Since 2007.
15?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I feel like the age when I came at 33, I adulted in Montana. And I have a deep respect for Montana.
Right.
I will always say I'm from Michigan, but I
Right.
think I fell in love in Montana.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I think that happens in your 30s and 40s and whatnot, where you come of age, kind of, or whatever. You kind of, your youth is behind you, and you get more intimate with life.
Yeah, as
Or
well,
the
yeah.
end of
and,
life,
and also,
possibly,
I think the ego goes into a different direction. You know, I think I
totally,
was so driven and wanting. I had all these like grand ideas of what I would be, and yet now, you know, the T.S. Eliot line of returning to what you already knew. I mean, I always knew I was a poet, but I
Right.
think I felt like I had to have a book to say it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I understand that. Yeah. It took me a long time to admit that I was a poet
Yeah.
publicly, even though I felt like it since, you know, I was a kid. But
Well, it's
at the
like-
same time,
yeah.
no one, I mean, you're living in Montana to begin with.
And you're a white male
You're
from
a what?
Alberton, right?
What does that pay?
Right, right.
What doesn't pay shit.
Well,
but, you know,
I mean, I always say it's like being a shepherd. Everybody understands the bucolic idea of it, but like nobody understands the value. It's hard in our culture to value this thing that we do. we don't get money.
And it is, you know, you did happen to latch on to, you know, maybe the one art form that is the most underpaid, I
Well,
guess,
yeah,
or compensated.
And
you
I
know.
think of it as like I don't want to say religious. I think it's a spiritual pursuit. I mean, the first job I really wanted to be or said at the dinner table was I wanted to be a minister.
Well, that's what, you know, Pam has said, you know, because I told her, I think, when we were, you know, young teenagers that I thought I was probably going to be a preacher or whatever.
Yeah, I could see it.
And of course, that went down pretty fast. as soon as I figured out that everything had to go through this particular filter for these people that I was giving me the blood of Christ or whatever to get me involved in the whole thing. And it was like, now what about all these other ideas? And
or all
once
these
you
other
start
people.
reading about other people across the globe and the religions that they're in, you're like, these are all very similar, you know.
Right.
You get right down to it.
Oh, yeah.
Like, so
I can see it, Mark. I mean, I think that there's like comedy and a well-crafted joke, real like spiritual. There's a big difference.
Totally.
The spiritual pursuit of doing something that you love.
And of course, her disappointment was that I ddidn't become a preacher and I became a poet simply because preachers make money, you know. Poets make nothing, you know.
Well, I mean, I always have worked. I remember since I was 12, had a job, and I have to say, like some of my favorite poetic, like connections have come from my jobs, more so than academics. You know, I mean, and that the people you meet and the people you connect, because I feel like at the heart of humor is empathy. At the heart of poetry is empathy, and that place of empathy to offer is invaluable and needed. I mean, I feel like it's so needed right now.
Well, and the jobs that I've had seemed like they were more connected to the earth and to people.
Yeah,
both. So those were easier to write about. I've never written a lot about being just like a teacher, you know, like classroom type poems or anything like that.
No, I've never written any. No, because you're in the moment. Because you're also doing that thing that you're in the moment. Like, I've never really written about poetry. I don't have it. I mean, for me, I have poetic experiences all the time, but they're usually with people or outside or just, I mean, the opportunity awaits. I think have that kind of spiritual lens.
Yeah.
That.
Well, read us another one.
All right. Let me see.
So, as a photographer, your friend, is it just Montana?
Yes.
It's okay. So
Only
it's
Montana.
It's
Only
like
Montana.
waxwings and landscapes and animals and all this
I mean,
different sort of.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, honestly, Mark, if it sits on someone's coffee table and they read a poem, great.
Right.
And then, don't you work at the library? I'll be like, yeah. So this is sort of a love to Missoula.
Okay.
This is one of, I wrote this during 2020, during the pandemic. Above the life I live in. People say you should run your own race, but I haven't been able to figure out a strategy other than running for hours outside, high above the life I live in. Cresting along rocks, ravens, spending full days with ravines in the alpine, moments when I forget I have feet. Just the simple moment of breath meeting breath, and I am a body between. I never feel like a failure when I move my body up a mountain. Never ask myself, what have I done with my one beautiful day given? Nor ask, what have I given back to this world when I am quiet with it? I've asked the clouds the hardest of questions, fully knowing they didn't need to answer back. No, they trust me, and with them, I'm enough.
Yeah. Nice. Well, I think we're getting real close probably to the end of our time because we yabbered a whole lot. Because do you have one more? Did you want to read us? Sure, for the road. One more poem.
Sure. How about? I feel like with all of our Robert Frost.
Yeah.
How I end it with a Robert Frost afterthought.
That little Frost in there. Yeah. Okay.
How about that?
Yeah.
Okay. Robert Frost's Afterthought. Out in the open fields of Montana, there's no room for hesitation. No shade to pause under, no woods for retreat. Out here, you choose your path with purpose. Even the aged two-tracked wind with the contours of wind and land. Fences suggest a clear intention of someone's word. These roads don't care if they are taken. aren't relying upon you or your longing to see what lies ahead. They only ask you to be fully present, secure in your footing to find what lies ahead. As if the old words of Cedric ring true, look where you're headed, your body will follow. As if out here you'll forever be reaching for the horizon, out past a wall of mountains you might never reach. Knowing there is so much more beyond what the eyes can believe. But here you are in this field. Here you walk into your own becoming.
Very nice. Good one
Thanks.
to end on.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, it was, it's fun to steal people's ideas and do something different.
Yeah. I mean, I was reading something in the paper the other day that somebody was beating up on old Bobby D.
I know,
again,
right? I know.
Because he's such of a thief, and it's like, yeah, so what? I
He's
mean,
ingenious.
Who isn't stealing from everybody else?
Right.
That's what we do.
Right. Elliot said, best poets don't borrow, they steal.
All right.
So
I'm glad you came on, you thief.
Yeah. Thank you. I hope you know me as the thief and not just the lady that works at the library, but thanks.
Yeah, so next time you're in the New Missoula library, stop in and check out Emily Walter.
Thank
Thank you for showing up. Next week, we'll see you.
Thanks, Mark.
You're welcome.
Got a lifetime filled with whiskey and short